Where do you look at Iran-West relationship heading by and large at this moment?
Well, actually, I would say that uh, Obama sabotaged the deal in a way in which is even more significant than what Trump did. Because Obama from day one violated the deal, and he did it systematically and intentionally. So Iran abided by its commitments, and the United States didn't. In fact, in 2015, I was also with the negotiating team as their media advisor, and I told Dr. Zarif on the very day that the deal was signed, when he asked me my opinion, I said, I don't think the Americans are going to abide by their commitments.
I remember two different fact sheets that came out after.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. For me, it was a bitter day because I did not, because remember, I was not a part of the negotiating team. Dr. Zarif wanted me to be on the team. I did not want to be on the team for my own personal reasons. I thought maybe they were going to give too many concessions, and I didn't want to be, if I don't agree, then the team will have internal strife, and it's not going to help because I wouldn't be a dominant voice. So I just said I'll come and help you with media. He asked me to be the spokesman for the team. I also said no, because I said a spokesman can't say anything. But if I'm just your media advisor, I can say what I like. And if I say something that hurts your negotiations, you can just say that, well, he's given his own opinion. He's not our official spokesman. So, but what Obama did, and the reason why I didn't believe that the Americans would abide by their commitments is because the Americans consider themselves to be above the law. They're exceptional. When you're exceptional, you can do what you want. Just like Israel. When they're the chosen people, that means Indians are subordinate. That means Arabs are subordinate. That means Iranians are subordinate. That means everyone is subordinate. And when you're subordinate, your life has no value or little value. Your property has little value. The same concept applies for Eurocentrism. The same concept that it is the same thing when you have American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism doesn't just mean that we're better, it means we have more privileges and rights. So when I sign a deal with you, you abide by your commitments and I abide by mine. But when I sign a deal with Americans, I abide my commitment. They say, well, and on this particular case, we will not do this, that you have to abide by your commitments, but we will not be fulfilling our side of the bargain. We have our reasons. And that's the end of the story. And the Europeans will say, well, yes, that's how it is. So I was skeptical. I was hoping it would work, but I was highly skeptical. And unfortunately, it turned out that I was right. And that under Obama, they violated the deal. It was never implemented. Well, small bits and pieces were, but by and large, the Americans did not fulfill their side of the bargain, and they continued to expand the sanctions regime. And I think that that is the story of the United States. Whether it's the Minsk Accords, whether it's the ceasefire negotiations over Gaza, the Americans are always lying. Remember, the Americans put forward a plan, and then they said the Israelis, this is the Israeli plan, and they agree. And the Israelis were saying, no, we don't accept it. And then Hamas was saying, we accept by and large. And then the Americans kept saying, Hamas doesn't accept it. The Israelis are on board. When we knew they were lying, and it was right in front of you. But the Americans are utterly dishonest, and the Western media is completely compliant. Otherwise, they would say, well, they would be screaming that the Israelis are blocking the ceasefire. But they won't do that. They may say a few things here and there, but the Western media the broader narrative will completely be in line with what Israeli demands, or whether it's Netanyahu or someone else. Doesn't matter. As I said, they will stick by Netanyahu until the last Palestinian child. Have no doubt about it. Have no doubt about it. This can go on, this Holocaust can go on for 4 or 5 years until everyone is dead. And they will continue to use the same language in the BBC. They will continue to use the same language on CNN and elsewhere and blame the victims. No doubt about it. And they will always say, October the 7th. And they will still repeat the lies if they could about October the 7th. And of course, the history of Palestine is irrelevant. The world began. God created the world on October the 7th. That sort of mentality.
I
So, yes, you're saying.
Sorry, no. You spoke about Americans and Israelis sabotaging a negotiation. I remember Hamas, I think it was in March, accepting the proposal, basically immediate ceasefire, deoccupation of the occupied territories, prisoners exchange, and then the next day Israel bombs Damascus, and then there was one more occasion. Next day they kill Ismail Haniyeh.
Yeah, so the Israelis will they will sabotage, and then the Americans will blame Hamas. So the problem is that the Americans are utterly dishonest at the negotiating table. And they do the same with Chinese. The Chinese say that they say something at the negotiating table, they agree on something, and then they don't implement it. And then they are arrogant. They say, they blame you. So with regards to the nuclear deal, the Americans lied. When Trump lost the election in 2000, the Americans were saying that Biden is going to sign the presidential decrees and remove the sanctions that were imposed on Iran by Trump so that he can revive the deal. Back then, I said I think it was at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, there was a online session. I think maybe Chatham House rules, but anyway, I said there were two sessions, but I said on both occasions, both before he came into office and afterwards, that he's not going to do that. And it's interesting that these people, I think it was the IISS, these people were close to the Democratic Party, and they were saying, yes, he's going to do this. And I knew he wasn't going to do it because that's how the Americans are. They don't abide by commitments. They use everything as leverage. And whenever you show goodwill, they see it as a sign of weakness. They don't see it as a sign of goodwill. So whenever Iran shows goodwill, and it has done so many times, from the 1980s till now, after the war, the Iranians gave the Conoco oil company, an oil field in the Persian Gulf. They negotiated for 2 years. And Mr. Rafsanjani, who was then the president, said this was I think he said a green light to the America. I think he used that term. What happened? Congress slapped sanctions on Iran's oil and gas sector. And the story goes on. I mean, I can give you many examples where the Iranians actually showed goodwill and the Americans showed greater hostility in return. So while I would like to see a deal where the Americans respect their side of the bargain, I am not optimistic at the moment because the Americans are a part of this genocide. They're part of this Holocaust. So are the Europeans. They're part of the aggression against Iran. The Europeans have banned Iranian airlines from going to Europe just recently. Those airlines are not really important for passengers, but they are a lot of the medicines that are imported or the supplies to produce medicines in Iran come through those planes. The Europeans know that. What they were targeting was Iran's medical supplies through those sanctions. The Iranians recognize that. They recognize what the West does. So, and of course, they monitor the Minsk Accords, they monitor the ceasefire negotiations. It's very difficult to envisage under these circumstances any deal with the West, especially when the Israeli regime is making such threats. When the Israeli regime is making such threats, then is having a nuclear deal really a smart thing to do under these circumstances? So, I'm not optimistic at the moment, but I am in general optimistic because the world is changing. BRICS, I think, was a big event. Not that during the summit everything changes, but it is, I think, symbolic of the changes that are taking place. I think that the partial rapprochement between China and India is very important and very welcome news. Um, so I think the West can continue to slaughter and massacre and oppress, but its days as an oppressive empire are numbered.
I want to leave you with a final question. And this is moving away a little bit from what we have been discussing, and asking you a larger question on the Iranian Revolution. Obviously, it's very it's unjust to bring Iranian Revolution towards the end and to ask you a 5 minute question, given it was such a historic moment. Um, Professor Fuad Azadi last time came here and he spoke about some of the socialist welfare measures that Iran still has and emerged out of those socialistic days of the Iranian Revolution. I wanted to ask you, from someone from the global south, and this has nothing to do with the West, about those protests that had happened after Masha Amini's death. And I want to ask you because when I read the literature on Iranian Revolution, it is uh, so extensive about how the revolution led to expansion of freedom of women, because a large numbers of women participate in so many organs of civil societies, and even Khomeini himself came and spoke about them and spoke to them, and that led to massive participation of women in different aspects of Iran, including universities, where we know that Iranian women are very well represented. Uh, and yet, we heard a year ago or a couple of years ago that the revolution failed in some of these early objectives, and they failed to move forward, which means that newer generation, which are perhaps culturally not aligned with some of the old ideas of the revolution, and the state didn't meet it. I know it's a complicated topic, but if you can sum this great, fascinating discussion by what your thoughts are on what happened in Iran internally.
Yes, the revolution was about social justice. It was also anti-colonial and anti-imperial. So, for example, from before the revolution, the revolutionaries and the leaders of the revolution, of the Islamic Revolution, they were discussing South Africa, and they were against the Shah for its policies in support of apartheid South Africa and in support of the Israeli regime. And they were opposed to US domination over Iran. And as you rightly point out, most young people in Iran didn't go to school, even though Iran was exporting 6 million barrels of oil a day. Most small towns and almost all villages didn't even have schools. The majority of young people didn't go to school. And women even worse than girls, they were worse off than boys. Immediately in the 1980s, despite the war that the West imposed upon Iran, Iran went towards universal education, and then they expanded universities. My boss at the University of Tehran, uh, the dean of my faculty, is a woman. And during the 21, 22 years that I've been a professor at the University of Tehran, 18 out of those 21 years, 18 years of those 21 years, I would say, or 22 years, the dean was a woman. And sometimes the head of my department would be a woman. So my boss would be a woman, and the boss of my boss would be a woman. In my department, and here again, I may be not completely accurate. I'm affiliate. I'm in two departments. I'm an affiliate in one, and I'm a member of another. In one department, the last four people, like if I'm not mistaken, in American Studies at the Faculty of World Studies, the last four people who were hired in the American Studies department were women. And in my department at the University of Tehran, the last, I think the last three people, well, the majority of the people who were hired over the recent years, if I'm not mistaken, are women. Because I have to think about it. It's a larger department, and we're two parts. But anyway, the majority of the people who've been hired are women, and I I think it's very clear that women in Iran under the revolution are much more empowered. Now, there are two things. Iran has its own definition of indecent exposure based upon its religious and cultural values. Well, how far should those laws go? That's debatable. How should those laws be implemented? That's debatable. But Iran's criteria for indecent exposure is different from the West. And just like in other issues, I don't see. I have my own views on Iranian laws and implementation, but I don't see why, by any means, Iran has to abide by Western standards on anything, unless they make sense to Iranians. Because Iranian laws on indecent exposure are not to put women in boxes. They are, in this worldview, whether one agrees with it or not, they are opposed to the commodification of women, the objectification of women, and the sexualization of women. Now, someone may say, well, I don't agree with how it's done, but that's the objective. Otherwise, we have women pilots. We have women taxi drivers. We have women in the armed forces. We have women in intelligence. But I digress. What happened a couple of years ago with Mahsa Amini? And I for an hour and more than an hour, I want to cough, and I keep thinking this is about to end the interview. So sorry if my voice is. I'm trying not to cough. So, sorry. I don't know what I've caught a cold or something. So for a couple of years ago, what really happened during the protests and riots on Mahsa Amini was that Mahsa Amini passed away. And immediately the Persian language media broadcast from the West, BBC Persian, VOA Persian, all these other media channels. There are more anti-Iranian media channels than there outside Iran than there are media channels inside Iran. It's a huge industry. The West is a huge amount of money. And the reason is because in the past, they didn't really focus on China or Russia. All the focus was on Iran. Only more recently are they refocusing on China. So they have this huge anti-Iranian media apparatus and terror organizations and all sorts of things that they've been working on for decades, largely under Israeli influence. So they were saying that this woman was tortured and beaten to death. And so immediately there were protests and riots. But there was never any evidence. And the footage that later came out didn't indicate that she was beaten. In fact, it really shows the opposite, that nothing happened to her. But the riots had already started. The autopsy also didn't show anything. A secretly filmed secret footage taken of her father indicated that she had a major operation when she was a child. But all that aside, the real issue was not Mahsa Amini. It was not about the late young woman, the late Mahsa Amini. It was about a younger generation, as you rightly pointed out, that, and this was post-corona, that was, and Iran has its problems. That's what the sanctions are for. The sanctions in Venezuela and Iran are to make life difficult, to turn people against the state, whether it's Cuba or Iran, or Syria or Venezuela, or that's the model. So many of these young people who were under this influence of this Persian media and who saw the problems at home. And Iran is a normal country. You have corruption, you have incompetence, you have everything, good and bad. They saw Iran as the problem. They concluded that, look, you're the troublemakers. Because most of these people were between the ages of 15 and 20, 21. They were not like me. They did not live through chemical weapons or anything like that. They were saying, many of them, and some of them were my own young students at my faculty, they were saying that the West wants peace, friendship, and stability, and you have a grudge, and you want conflict, and you want hostility, and you are the troublemakers, and we want to live our lives. That was basically to a large degree, that's what this was about. That these young people saw Iran as the problem and not the West. The West was, democratic. They spoke, for them, human rights was important. Free women's rights, children's rights, animals' rights, all sorts of rights, everything. They were just good, and we were bad. Regardless of how true or false that is, and of course I consider that to be an incorrect assessment. What happened in Gaza has changed things dramatically. Not that all these young students are suddenly revolutionaries or anything like that, but this image of the West, not just in Iran, across the world, as I was saying early on in our discussion, has been demolished. The West will do anything to anyone. They're willing to do anything. If they're willing to do this to the Palestinian people, they're willing to do it to the Indian people, to the Iranian people, to anyone if it serves their interests. And of course, we know that from the history of colonization, that is what they've done. What they're doing in Gaza is not new. They've done, in numbers, they've done far worse to India. But the difference between Gaza and India is that this is being done in front of our eyes. What happened, and this also, by the way, revived people across the world, especially in the global south, or as some say, the global majority. When they look at what's happening in Gaza, they see their own history being repeated. So when I was at school, or you're at school, or maybe you and I are perhaps a bit different because we're interested in these areas, but when kids go to school, they read a couple of pages about India's history, Iran's history, or what the British did, or in Iran, or what the British did in India, or what the Russians did, or what the Americans did. But it's just a few pages and you move on. And it's not really your focus because you need to learn maths and biology and whatever. You either want to become an engineer, or you want to, or a physician. So most people are not even interested in that. So it's, people like ourselves, we're more, are minority. Many of us, we read the Western textbooks. We don't read our sources. But in any case, what happened in Gaza suddenly revived everything for everyone across the world. And the same is true with these young Iranians. I've had young students come up to me over the past few months say, I was completely wrong. And even one student just after I went to Lebanon, because I stayed in Lebanon for a few days, that student came up, was very kind to me and saying saying how that student didn't like me a year ago, saying that how worried he was about me in Lebanon, and then he said, how do I make up for what I did before? And I said, just study hard and don't be fooled by the Americans. What else can you do? Just don't be fooled by their narratives in future. The West has destroyed its image. So Iran has many flaws. India has many flaws. Pakistan has many flaws. Kazakhstan has many flaws. All countries have flaws. But what I would say as a final note to your viewers is that if one is fair and objective, what is happening in Gaza is a horrific crime. It is the worst crime in human history because it's being carried out in front of our eyes. We're watching it happen. The country that is standing up to the West and saying that we will not allow you to wipe out the Palestinian people is the Iranians. It is Iran. It is the Islamic Republic of Iran and its allies. So it is Iran against this massive coalition in the West. Morally speaking, who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side. And where does the Western media stand in all this? So if you look at this current situation, then I think it's fair to say that people should question everything they've heard about Iran over the past 40 some years that comes from the West. There are very few good books on Iran. Actually, there's one pretty good book that I can mention called Going to Tehran by Flint and Hillary Leverett, who both worked in the White House. But other than that, there may be a couple of others, but I don't I don't recall anything in particular that I don't agree with everything in their book, but I think it's a very good book. If someone wants to learn about Iran, that's a good book to read. But most of the books on Iran are just like what you see in the Western media. They're one-sided, hostile, irrational, and they're wrong. For 40 some years, they've been saying Iran is about to implode, Iran is falling apart, Iran is evil, it's corrupt. And then on the other hand, they're saying that Iran is a growing menace, a threat to the world. How can you be both at the same time? If you're falling apart and you're incompetent and you're evil and everyone hates you and the people want to revolt and you're collapsing because of corruption and incompetence, how can you be a growing menace and a threat to the whole world? It doesn't make sense, but Western narratives don't. It's all a part of this Orientalism. It's this latent knowledge that has been built and which is inconsistent often, but because that knowledge is so powerful, the inconsistencies in the narrative are not easily visible to ordinary people. So you can be both a growing menace and collapsing regime at the same time, and people will nod their heads because that latent Orientalism makes this inconsistent and paradoxical description seem consistent, reasonable, and logical. So I would call on people to rethink Iran based upon who's doing what in Gaza.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. The last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.